Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I am Sergeant First Class Welch of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army. Guard of Honor, 2 of the unknown soldier.
It's summer 1989, and at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery, 12-year-old now-CASA Hoe is spellbound. The boy is watching the changing of the guard, and he can't take his eyes off the proceedings.
The ceremony that you are about to witness is the changing of the guard. In keeping with the dignity of this ceremony, it is requested that everyone remain silent and standing. Thank you.
His father, Vietnam War veteran Allen Hoe, had traveled with him from their home in Hawaii to Washington 2 days earlier.
As a lawyer, I had some business in Washington, D.C., and when my business was done, he and I went and visited all of the museums, etc.
Allen had been an Army medic during the Vietnam War, and one tragic day in May 1968, 18 soldiers from his unit died in battle. Allen would spend the next 20-plus years staying in contact with those men's families who welcomed him into their homes. So Allen brought his son now-CASA to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
We went to the wall where I introduced him to the 18 men whose names are on that wall on panel 59E. And he had grown up hearing stories of them, knowing them, and actually meeting some of the other buddies who survived with me. So he was familiar with the story. And then at the wall, I said, "You want to go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely."
When they arrived, the place was packed. Allen started searching for a good spot to watch the ceremony from, and when he finally found one, he turned to tell now-CASA.
I said, "Okay, let's go over here, son." And I looked down and he was gone. I said, "Oh no, okay." He had walked down the front steps and had found a place to sit down underneath the chain barrier right there by the stanchions along the path that the guards marched. And he was just enraptured by that sight of the sentries when they first came walking out with their clicking heels and their precise movements. He did not move a muscle.
Allen had never seen his son so interested in something.
At the conclusion of that changing of the guard ceremony, when the crowds had pretty much dispersed, I said, "Hey, now-CASA, are you ready to go?" And he turned around, looked up the steps and said, "No, Dad, can we watch one more time?"
Allen looked at the combination of enthusiasm and awe in now-CASA's face. It was a look he had once had, just prior to volunteering to be sent to Vietnam. So he sat beside his son and watched the next ceremony, and then another one.
That moment meant so much to him. It was from that moment on, his total focus was on becoming a soldier. It was like, all right, that's what he's going to do.
And sure enough, now-CASA followed in his father's footsteps and became a soldier. He aced Navy dive school, passed Ranger school in his first attempt, and became a first lieutenant. His father was so incredibly proud of the man he had become. Tragically, now-CASA was killed by a sniper in Iraq in January 2005. But Allen has spent the last 20 years keeping his son's memory alive. In May of this year, Allen and now-CASA were both celebrated at the National Memorial Day concert for the lives of service. It was a moving ceremony and a great tribute to two men who had aided their country and community for over 7 decades. In today's episode, our hosts sit down with Allen Hoe to talk about his experiences in the Vietnam War, the strength of his son now-CASA even in despair, and yes, about how beautiful and inspiring the state of Hawaii is. I'm Carrie Varo-Heikes, and this is Army Matters.
Army Matters is brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk helicopter. It's an American institution and a global icon. It's a proven performer, a lifesaver, and a force multiplier. And as the world changes, the Black Hawk is evolving to stay ahead. Learn how at lockheedmartin.com/Blackhawk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Army Matters. I am your co-host, the 15th Sergeant of the Army, Dan Dailey. I'm here with my good friend,
Lieutenant General retired Leslie Smith, the 66th Inspector General of the United States Army. And I'm glad to be back with my buddy, Dan Blue Eyes Dailey.
Let's do something different this time.
Yes. Can I go first?
No.
Why not? So we're going to do something different? What?
We don't want to be that different.
Oh, come on now.
We just want to do something different.
Okay.
So for those that don't know, Les's daughter is actually an Army doctor. Les, what started that in her life?
She's got great parents. I think for both of our daughters, we always wanted them to do something where they saw a sense of purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And for Tori, I think it started way early in her youth when I had knee surgery. You remember those competition games we used to play against non-commissioned officers?
Oh yeah, football and
yeah.
Where we would pound you guys all the time.
No, not true. When I was a commanding general of Fort Leonard Wood, that was another conversation.
It was the opportunity to hit an officer,
yes,
as hard as you possibly
legally.
could. Legally,
this was basketball. This was basketball.
Well, yeah, you can get a little physical.
Yeah, you can. You can.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, backing up even before that time frame, when I was at 20th Bernie, I introduced her to one of the docs that had to do some work on me, and she shadowed him. But I think that was the biggest thing. She saw the passion, and the sense of purpose, just like I'm sure we're going to talk about today. But it's always about this sense of purpose and helping other people.
So, Les, what did you think when your daughter just said, "Hey, I'm going to be an Army doctor"?
Well, with our kids, we said, "Hey, we got you when it comes to undergrad, but everything after that is on your own." So she was thinking about what options and opportunities were there.
Yeah. And
she was, I'm not going to say she was fighting it, but she didn't think that she wanted to serve in the military. And so I said, "Hey, this is a great opportunity for you to do it." And she found that she was called to serve like so many have served in our family over the years.
So the reason why we're talking about things like medics, parents, and service is because our guest today has done all of that. He's been a medic, a father of a soldier, unfortunately, who we lost in combat, comes from a long legacy of service, and is currently serving as a CASA in the state of Hawaii. So, Les, what do you think? You want to listen to my interview with Allen Hoe?
Sure, let's listen to your interview with Allen Hoe.
Allen Hoe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. And as we would say here in Hawaii, being this early in the morning, aloha kakahiaka, or good morning.
Well, aloha to you back. As we talked before, we started recording. The two of us have actually met before. Back when I was the Sergeant of the Army, I visited Hawaii, and CASA Hoe was still the CASA back then. And on that first trip, he invited me to take a canoe ride out in the ocean in a traditional Hawaiian canoe. Sir, can you tell us what's the significance of the boat we rode on, and how does that relate to your son?
Well, first off, that canoe is representing one of our native Hawaiian legacies, ancient legacies. That's how we traveled, or how they traveled back when there was no Teslas, etc. But anyway, when Nainoa grew up in the Army, his service, he first began as an enlisted soldier, but he was able to basically impress a lot of the people, both in the Army Reserves, which he first started as an enlisted soldier. And one of the individuals that were totally impressed by his service and his commitment to the Army was a young lady who was an Army officer who subsequently became the coach and leader of a canoe club here in Hawaii. And to honor Nainoa's memory, she had a special racing canoe built in his honor. So the name of the canoe is Keali'i Hoku Helilani, or the chief that travels the heavens. And that canoe has an incredible legacy here in Hawaii among the racing canoe clubs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it was an incredible experience. And to learn the history about how Native Hawaiians used to travel between islands and cross oceans and those things, it is amazing. It was an incredible experience. And the food on the beach was a fine tribute to the end of a wonderful day. So thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for that incredible experience. There's one thing I have to ask before we talk more about you and your son. The sport of polo. I understand that you've played polo for years, and you even run a polo club where you live. What's the biggest polo match you've ever played in?
Wow. Actually, I had a chance to play not only here in Hawaii, but in New Zealand, in California, in Virginia, Maryland, and perhaps the biggest experience for me in terms of polo is I got to play with the Argentine Army troops in Buenos Aires a number of times about 3-4 years ago. And polo is recognized worldwide, but right now the highest level where it's played is in Argentina. Historically, polo was introduced to Hawaii in 1880. So we have a long legacy in terms of cattle, ranching, horses, and the sport of polo.
That was something I was unaware of until I visited Hawaii the first time. You mentioned that you come from a long line of Hawaiian warriors. Can you describe your family history for us a little bit?
Sure. I have ancestors who were ancient warriors here in Hawaii prior to the Western exposure. Captain Cook first arrived, but I have an ancestor who served as a warrior commander, if you will, under King Kamehameha I when he unified the rival chiefs of Hawaii into what we currently refer to as Hawaii. I also have ancestors who served in Queen Victoria's cavalry units, or the light dragoons. And I have a couple of ancestors who fought in India and in the first Anglo-Afghan War in the 1820s and the 1830s. And so when people ask me, why do you have this interest in horses? I just simply say, well, you know what? It's genetic.
Yeah, that's an incredible history of the family. So let's talk about your military career. You were drafted in the Army and then stationed in San Francisco, but you volunteered to be sent to Vietnam. Why did you do that? And please describe for us the reason behind it.
Sure. As a young teenager, I was absolutely involved in the sport of surfing and hot rods, et cetera. You know, the 60s, that was sort of what young boys did back then.
Yeah.
With the knowledge that at some point, Uncle Sam would call on me and I would be drafted. And sure enough, 1966, I received that little card in the mail that Uncle Sam needed my expertise, if you will, and looking for young, adventurous young men. And I was drafted, spent a couple of weeks at Fort Ord, and then was sent to Fort Sam Houston, where I trained as a combat medic. After my training as a combat medic, and I like to think I became very proficient at an elementary level, because combat medics basically were provided with the training and skills for emergency medical care. And the majority of my class, when we graduated from Fort Sam Houston's training as combat medics, all got assignments to Vietnam. I discovered my assignment would be the Presidio in San Francisco at the hospital there. I was then sent up to Travis Air Force Base, where I was the battalion medic for a Army Artillery Air Defense Command, which was fascinating. To be a young Army soldier on an Air Force base meant you were pretty much invisible. So 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and the rest of the time was yours. And after a while, I thought that my skills and abilities as a combat medic weren't really put to its best use. Being 19 years old, there are certain things about the war in Vietnam that seemed exciting and challenging to me. And I submitted my 1049 request for transfer to go to Vietnam. I didn't hear back for maybe 10 days. And I went in to see my first sergeant one day and I said, "Hey, Top, I submitted a 1049. And he said, "Hey, young man, sit your butt down here. You and I need to have a discussion." He had just come back from Vietnam. He said, "Why do you want to do that? War is real there and people are getting killed and people are getting seriously wounded." So he said, "Don't give me into this patriotic thing." And I said, "No, it's not a sense of patriotism. I believe that I have special abilities as a combat medic, and I don't want to, for the rest of my life, wonder how I was able to handle combat." And he looked at me with a puzzled look and he said, "You young kids from Hawaii are all nuts, but if you're serious about this, resubmit and I'll push it forward." And sure enough, within 10 days, I was gone.
Wow, that fast.
Yeah, it was amazing.
So what did you learn as a combat medic in a role? When you first got there, the experience, describe it to me and how it shaped you.
I think like everyone else, when you first get there, everything they taught you, you quickly found out was totally inaccurate. One and one did not add up to two. It added up to much more than that. I was assigned to an infantry battalion and a rifle company, but I met a platoon leader there who had been tasked with putting together back then what the Army was shifting its combat role was a long-range reconnaissance platoon. And he said, "Hey, I think you're going to have more fun serving with me as my senior medic in this new LRP team or long-range recon team." For me, that sounded exciting. So our platoons were organized such that I became very close to all of the guys. And I tried to give each one of these guys as much information about primary medical care and first aid. And as a result, I was cross-trained by them in terms of all the weapons, the skills of calling artillery, et cetera, et cetera. And I look back, it was a crazy time, but I enjoyed it, but for the fact that some of my men were seriously wounded and a bunch of them were killed. But it was my duty to serve them every day. I still remember each one to this day. It's just an incredible experience.
Yeah. I spent a career as an infantry soldier, and every single infantry soldier is intimately familiar and friends with the medic. We used to call him Doc, and Doc took care of us. And I can remember all my medics I had from the time I was a young team leader all the way through when I was a battalion CSM. But they're just incredible young men and women that did amazing things and saved lives, countless lives. But unfortunately, war does have a negative effect sometimes. And something happened on Mother's Day of 1968. Alan, can you describe that day to our listeners, exactly what happened?
Yeah, I always look back and say, there but for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here today. For Mother's Day, which was a Sunday, May 12, 1968, I had just come back in country and arrived back at the battalion headquarters and getting ready to rejoin my team up north. And I was told, "Hey, Doc, we're going to hold you back here for another day because the team is on the move. They're being transferred to another area and you won't be able to catch up with them for another day." That's typical infantry kind of stuff as it relates to where you are, what your team is doing, and what you're expected to follow up with. The following day, when I was supposed to jump on that helicopter to catch up with my team that had been sent to a Green Beret camp to assist in security for an evacuation of the Alpha camp along the border of Laos, the battalion had come under attack by a North Vietnamese regiment. And at the last minute, the decision was made to evacuate the whole camp. And early in the morning of the following day, my team, which had been posted at 3 outposts, were overrun, and I lost 18 men on that day. It was incredibly heart-wrenching because here I was, just come back from R&R, trying to get out to be with my men, and hearing the description of the combat that they were involved in, and the fact that some of them were last heard defending their positions before their radio transmissions went silent.
18 comrades in one day is tough.
Yeah.
You made a point after the war to stay in touch with the family members of the man that died during that battle. And can you describe why you did that?
Combat is all about hours and hours of sheer boredom, interspersed with minutes, seconds, whatever you want to call it, of sheer terror. The hours and hours of sheer boredom is generally late at night when you're on guard duty, or during the day when you're on watch, and you become very close to the men that you serve with, and everyone is sharing stories about who they are, who their families are, where they come from, what they've done, but more so how proud they are of their family's service and what their intent is when they leave this godforsaken country and make it back to the world, as we used to say. All of the guys that I served with, we all became very intimate with each other's backgrounds. And we all promised, one, that should it ever come about, that we would do our best to ensure that our families were made aware of how they served in combat. At the time we lost all these guys on Mother's Day, they were all declared missing in action. And so I felt this obligation to reach out to their families to assure them that their sons were brave warriors all the way up until the end, as I knew it happened. And that really was just a personal commitment. And I'm sure you'll probably say the same thing of your docs and your medics.
Oh, yeah.
They were special to your whole operation, and each one of your guys had a special connection with their doc.
Yeah. As I said before, I was in complete amazement. Unfortunately, war does get a vote sometimes, and our soldiers get hurt. But our doctors and our medics saved so many lives. And to see the comfort in our soldiers' eyes when the medic gets to them is just incredible. I often said that there's a lot of reasons why soldiers fight. Have the incredible medical system is one of those reasons, because they know that if they do get hurt, then they're going to get the best care they can possibly receive.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite memory, Alan, of staying in touch with the soldiers' families?
Just this overwhelming sense of peace and comfort whenever we would meet face to face. The mother of my lieutenant, whenever she saw me, she would just give me the biggest hug. Mm-hmm. My RTO's dad would call me his son, just to be able to sit down and share stories of what I had done with their sons in Vietnam. Brings a lot of peace, and subsequently it became something very special for me when I lost my son.
Yeah.
We're brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk helicopter is modernizing for the 21st century security missions with a new engine that's 50% more powerful, a digital backbone for faster technology upgrades, and an onboard team of drones to counter advanced threats. Learn more at lockheedmartin.com/blackhawk.
Welcome back to Army Matters. Now, sir, I'd like to talk about your son, Noah. In the beginning of the episode, we heard about how he was inspired to become a soldier. Now, sir, I'd like to talk about an experience he had at a school that I also went to called Ranger School. What was the unique situation he experienced there?
His name, Nainoa, means one without any challenges or failures. His whole life evolved around his ability to pick a point and get there without any major difficulties. And he did Ranger School in one pass, which was pretty amazing for a young man at that time. But the best story that I like to recall was shared with me by a couple of the guys who were part of his squad going through training. It was during the winter months up at Dailey, and it was bitterly cold. And he had been able to successfully complete all of his patrols and missions. But, the Ranger sergeants who run the show, they are challenged as well. They don't want anybody to get by too easy. So the majority of them are committed to failing somebody. And so they were getting towards the end of the mountain phase, and they were not too pleased that Nainoa was doing so well. And so one day, the sergeant called Nainoa over and was looking for a way to critique his performance. And he said, "Hey, Ranger, where are your gloves?" Because he had noticed Nainoa's hands were somewhat frostbitten. And he said, "I gave them to one of his teammates." And he said, "That's not too smart. Why would you give your gloves to your fellow Ranger soldier over there, and you then suffer this freezing weather and potential frostbite?" What was shared with me was Nainoa's response, "Well, Sergeant, I guess I'm a better man than you." And the sergeant, and the sergeant said, "I guess you are. Okay, pass."
That's a risky thing to say to one of the Ranger instructors when you're a student. I can tell you that.
Yeah. But they were all suffering from the bitter cold.
That cold, yeah. So, Alan, can you talk to us about the events of January 22nd, 2005?
Yeah. Nainoa was assigned to 321, 3rd Battalion, 21st Infantry Regiment, the Gimlets. He was especially proud to be part of the Gimlets because in Vietnam, I was part of the 2nd of the 1st, and one of our sister battalions was 321, the Gimlets. So he grew up knowing the stories of those young men who were my friends who were Gimlet warriors. And he was so proud to be able to be a rifle platoon leader with a battalion that was a sister battalion to his dad in Vietnam. He had shared the stories with his men of Dad's experience in Vietnam. And after he had gotten downrange, he said, "Dad, please send the battle flag. My men," I shared the story of your men, "they want our platoon to carry that flag in combat." So on January 22nd in 2005, as he normally did, he carried that battle flag with him on a patrol. They were on a patrol in Mosul when he was shot by a sniper, and the bullet found that slight opening in the body armor under his shoulder. Obviously, everyone agreed that he had been targeted because he was standing next to his RTO, and the sniper who targeted him knew that the targets were always going to be the officers in charge of a patrol. He, after some time, the surgeons and the medical staff there were unable to resuscitate him, and he passed away on January 22nd, 2005.
Yeah. Well, we're terribly sorry for your loss, CASA. And he was a valiant warrior for our country.
Yeah.
So we fast forward Memorial Day 2005. Alan, you attended an event at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial honoring nurses returning from the war. Can you describe what happened that day?
Over the course of my life as a civilian, as a veteran, I had come to know the lady who created or founded the Vietnam Women's Memorial. And she then asked me to be a director on her foundation. So on Memorial Day 2005, we learned that 2 young nurses had just returned from Iraq, and would we like to invite them to be part of our program? And of course, absolutely we would. And one of the things that I took with me from Hawaii to DC were 2 special flower lei, which is tradition, a Hawaiian cultural tradition to present a flower lei to recognize someone's participation in your program. And as this young nurse who was in her desert camos came walking up to me, I said, "Are you Major Coughlin?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Here, I'm Alan, and thank you for participating, and I want to present this lei to you as a special token of our appreciation." As she bent forward so I could put the lei over her neck, she saw this My Hero pin that I have worn on my shirt with a photo of Nainoa and the words "My hero." And her hand just reached out and grabbed that button. And I was somewhat taken back. She said, "I know him." And that just kind of rocked me back on my heels. I said, "You know him? How do you know him?" That's my son. He was killed in Iraq. She said, "I was with him when he died." That was just an absolute incredible moment. All the people in the crowd standing around us, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was so moved by that statement. And over the course of the next hour or so, when we had a chance to converse, I learned the story as to what came about when Nainoa's men took him to the cache where she was the head nurse and she was in charge of it.
Yeah. Can you share that story with us?
She said that the whole platoon arrived there at the cache unit, and they waited outside, and they were told, "We'll let you know what happened, so you guys need to go back to your OP." And he said, they all refused. They said, "We're not leaving until we get to say our last goodbyes to our lieutenant." And she shared with me that one of her tasks as the nurse preparing Nainoa for a final viewing, her job was to make sure that he was properly prepared. And one of the things that she did was to close his eyes. And she said that she was terribly bothered by the fact that whenever she went to close his eyes, his eyelid would just open a little bit. And she thought that I would be very upset with that fact that she didn't fully comply with all of her duties to properly prepare this soldier for viewing by his men. And then when she shared that story with me, I just kind of laughed. I said, "Paula, she gave me this very strange look." And I said, "Paula, Nainoa's very unique characteristics is that when he slept, his eyes were always just a little bit open, and to the extent that his men, when they were supposed to be asleep, would never know if he was awake or if he was asleep or if he was watching what they were doing or not." And when I shared that with her, I could see the sense of relief come over her face.
Your story was told this year at the National Memorial Day concert, and it was narrated by Tony Award-winning actor D.B. Wong. What did it feel like to have this?
D.B. Wong's recitation of my story totally blew me away. To kind of hear it presented in that manner, at that location, in that setting, I was like astounded. And then especially when the young lady came out to sing Aloha Oe. Unbeknownst to me, she had heard one of my earlier broadcasts on public TV in Hawaii. This young lady was from Hawaii. And when she sang the song, it was just so touching for me because that song was written by Queen Liliuokalani, but was inspired by the time that she spent in Maunawili Valley. And Maunawili Valley is where my family lives and where Nainoa grew up.
Thank you for your incredible service and sacrifice of your family, and the ultimate sacrifice of your son, which can never be replaced. But thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. It's great seeing you again, good. Sergeant Major.
Good to see you.
Awesome.
And hopefully we can get another canoe sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
Army Matters is brought to you by Sikorsky, a Lockheed Martin company. The Black Hawk is the workhorse of the Army Division and will keep flying for decades to come. Thousands of skilled American workers produce this combat-proven helicopter. A new multi-year contract will keep production lines moving, while modernization keeps the aircraft at the cutting edge. Learn more at lockheedmartin.com/Blackhawk.
At the beginning of today's interview, we heard Dan and guest Allen Hoe discuss the significance of a Hawaiian canoe ride they took part in a few years ago. In today's chapter spotlight, we'd like to highlight another canoe regatta that took place in Hawaii earlier this summer. On August 17th, the Hawaii chapter of AUSA hosted the now-CASA Wounded Warrior Canoe Regatta in Honolulu. Held on the grounds of the Halekoa Hotel, the day of racing honored and supported wounded warriors, their families, and the families of the nation's fallen heroes. Started in 2009, the event was originally organized to assist recovering soldiers through the healing powers of the Hawaiian waters. Fast forward to today, and the event has grown so much that this year, it featured 98 teams competing for prizes. Outrigger canoe paddling is one of Hawaii's top sports, and the prowess exhibited in the water was a testament to that. Congrats to everyone who competed, took part, and helped out with the event. And kudos to everyone at the AUSA Hawaii chapter. If you or your chapter would like to be profiled on the show, please email us at podcast@ausa.org. Aloha!
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Del Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hua.